old Becky Hill reading the verdict would come to play a major role in this story, which no one knew at the time. But Becky almost got this verdict thrown out because of her behavior behind the scenes with the jurors. And could it still, her behavior, get this verdict thrown out? Is that totally settled? I know that we had a hearing in which a different judge said, no, I'm not throwing out the verdict. But could that be reversed on appeal? I imagine Alec's lawyers are taking that up.
No, it's incredible to watch that footage. I was sitting there that night and I was leaning forward on the edge of my seat, just listening to it because I remember that emotion. And all of the docket numbers were like, but what's the answer? So
right, spit it out.
So, but we had been in that courtroom. It's very tight corners. These soaring ceilings. It was designed in the 1820s, but very tight quarters. And we had been in there every day for 6 weeks. And by we, I mean the lawyers, the law enforcement officers, the jury, the Murdaughs. They were across the aisle from me. I could, exchange pleasantries every day. And so it was an extraordinary result to be there that night and listen to the verdict read by Becky. And Becky was really like the den mother of the courtroom, because the clerk of court makes sure the jury has lunch, make sure that the press has the credentials, or, there's so many people, and downtown Walterboro didn't have places to eat. What about food trucks, which they ultimately brought in? She was sort of the principal of an elementary school, is what it felt like a little bit. So it's surreal for Becky to be the center of so much scrutiny. But what that scrutiny is about is her relationships and potential talking out of school with members of the jury, many of whom she knew beforehand. And many of the jurors knew each other. It's a small town. I'm from a relatively small town myself in the South. And, if you had 100 people in church the day before jury selection, 5 of them would have gotten a jury summons. So, people knew each other, and the jury wasn't sequestered. Everybody in town knew who they were. And Becky, knew a lot of them personally. And so the question was, did she talk to them out of school? And did she say things that would prejudice them against Alec, particularly when he took the stand?
And you had jurors come forward to say, yes, at least one of them said, she influenced my verdict.
And it is a small town. And we talked a little bit about the bootlegging case involving Old Buster. It's extraordinary, but Becky's grandmother and grandfather and her uncle, who was a teenager, were federally charged with felonies in that bootlegging ring. They were on Buster's payroll.
Boy. And everything is connected.
Everything's connected there. But to your question, Megyn, I think that we did have a first answer. There was a hearing back in January where the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Jean Toll, was asked by her former colleagues on the Supreme Court to take a listen to this request for a new trial. She denied it, but the defense is appealing it back to the Supreme Court. They've agreed to hear it, even though it seems unlikely they will overturn their own the person that they trusted with this decision. And then also they're very close allies with Judge Newman, who presided over the initial proceeding. He's very tight with the Chief Justice, Don Beatty. So I spoke with Dick. I saw him recently in Columbia, Dick Harpootlian, and they see their best chance at a new trial at the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals in Richmond, just a little bit further removed from South Carolina, which is such a small state. And getting fresh ears at this idea of not just did Becky Hill say things to the jurors that were prejudicial, but also did the state apply the wrong standard? And it was it's a measure of degrees. Like, yes, we acknowledge that she talked with the jury, but did it move the needle? And so what they hope is that the federal court will apply a different standard.
Yeah, that they're going to argue they were held to too high a burden of proof to prove jury tampering, and that a lower standard should have been applied, which would have allowed them to prove jury tampering, which would allow him to get a new trial. The Justice Toll was great when she came in and held that hearing over Becky Hill. The allegations against Becky Hill just got weirder.
Justice Toll, I will say, she's just such an extraordinary figure in South Carolina history. I used to cover South Carolina politics when I was a reporter at the state newspaper in Columbia, and she was the Chief Justice at the time, former Speaker of the House. She's been in public life there for 60 years and was a young lawyer. And this is so extraordinary to me, was a young lawyer in a time when women weren't even allowed to serve on a jury. until 1968.
Wow.
And so she was
did
talking to all male juries.
When she was up there, I say this lovingly, she seemed like a tough old broad in the best sense, like she wasn't going to tolerate any nonsense.
She would love to hear you say that. And she knew the Murdaughs. She knew the Murdaughs, and she had actually, both in the legislature, I talked with her about this, both in the legislature and on the bench, had pushed for laws that would kind of claw back some of the power that they were using, inappropriately, in her view. So she knew the Murdaughs quite well over the course of decades.
She made the comment about Becky Hill that would become very well known. Here it is, SOT 52.
I find that the clerk of court is not completely credible as a witness. Ms. Hill was attracted by the siren call of celebrity. She wanted to write a book about the trial and expressed that as early as November 2022, long before the trial began.
And that led to bad behavior by Becky Hill, which got this whole thing, mucked up. But do you remember, it's been a while since we've covered this, but she also has a son who worked in the courthouse. And there was an allegation about him wiping his phone and wiping her phone on the day that they were supposed to turn them over for an internal ethics investigation. It smelled to high heaven.
It is, I think it's, if you're not from a small town in the rural South, maybe it just, it boggles the mind, but her son was the information technology director for the county. And that was, she's an elected official. She is, but she's also, politically powerful. And some of those jobs are patronage jobs. And he was in that role and is, accused of tapping the phone of an county administrator that was communicating with the state ethics board to try to find out what was going on in the investigation with his mother. There were all sorts of wiping the phone, which, the lawyers will tell you is a fairly standard move in some defense cases, but it looked highly irregular to a layperson. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because it's such a big case. It captivated so much attention that the center ring of the circus is really Alec Murdaugh in the trial, but there's so many outer rings. With the Mallory Beach case, for example, there's another case that's ongoing about whether the convenience store where Paul bought beer, whether the owner of that convenience store has been trying to harass the Beach family over the years. That's been going on for several years. Becky is facing an investigation into her behavior, and that's been going on. So we're in multiple layers of drama with this story, and it's just incredible. Like the layers, I remember sitting in court and watching Alec during a break. He was, 6 feet away from me. And he's the center of this, he's the eye of this hurricane, and there's so much swirling around him that one person could stir up so much chaos is really amazing.
So now here we are where he's appealing. He's going to argue Becky Hill mucked up the trial to the point where he gets another trial. We don't love the chances, but one never knows. And in the meantime, the wrongful death lawsuit that Mallory Beach's family brought against Alec, is that totally resolved?
That was the remnants of that were resolved this week with a $500,000 payment from Alec's insurer that had been tied up, and that was paid to the lawyers the paper was filed this past Monday. So that case is pretty well wrapped up. Did
the family get a payment too?
The family did. Not this past summer, but summer of 23, they received a payment largely from Parker's convenience store, this convenience store where Paul bought beer, on the order of $14 million. So it was a significant civil judgment that, and I learned a lot about personal injury law in the course of reporting this book. But, this was considered, what was Mallory's life worth? It is blood money. And so it's a difficult fact of personal injury law that the more money that you get paid is a reflection of what, a jury might think your loved one's life is worth.
I'm sure it's a special form of sentencing for you, because every time you get into the car that money bought or the bed that money paid for. It's got to make you feel awful.
And they will tell you, and they will tell you, Mrs. Pamela Pinckney, Hakeem Pinckney's mother. Hakeem was the paraplegic teenager who died in a nursing home and was robbed by Alec Murdaugh twice. She would tell you she would give back all of it for time with her son. It's the proxy we have in our judicial system to make a family as whole as possible, knowing that nothing really ever will.
For those of us holding our breath for the past several months as we came up to this election, we can finally exhale. Work can at last be done on the major issues this country's facing, one of the most significant being our national debt. The fact is, we're broke, and that debt is a house of cards for our nation that cannot be quickly dismantled. So the strategy remains the same. You might want to diversify your savings. This is why I want to tell you about Birch Gold. So many things are out of our control, out of our president's control. So it can be important to have a safe haven for your savings. Birch Gold Group can help you convert an IRA or 401k into an IRA in physical gold. And the best news is it does not cost you 1 cent out of pocket. Text MK to 989898 to get your free info kit. Plus, right now, you will receive a free 1-ounce silver eagle coin for every $5,000 purchased. Protect your savings with Birch Gold. Text MK to 989898 and claim your eligibility for free silver today. Thanks so much for watching. If you like what you just saw, hit the subscribe button for more clips and full episodes.